Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. We'll get started in probably just one more minute. Thanks for your patience. Right, what do you think, Andy? We get started?
Yeah, I was thinking we should have just played your video while we were waiting to get started, honestly.
Oh my gosh. Hey, maybe you're right. Maybe that's the background track that I need
Exactly.
in future webinars. I'll keep that in mind. But hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here at 5 p.m. after school hours, no less. My name is Fei Yang. I'm the founder of Your Epic Consulting, which is a college admissions coaching business. And I'm so excited to kind of kick off this webinar as part of a new partnership with the LA Alliance School, specifically for the MIT school, but potentially with the district at large. A little bit about myself: I graduated UCLA in 2017, and while I was a student, that's where I met your executive director, Mr. Tianco, who came back as an alumni, and we over the years reconnected, and kind of this golden opportunity sort of presented itself. And today we're going to be hosting a workshop focusing on the common application and combining more of a high-level overview as well as kind of more nuanced insights that are going to be presented by my good friend and colleague, Andy Nguyen, who is a UC Berkeley admissions officer. A little bit more on Andy's background in just a minute, but so looking at today's goals for today's session, well, I know that you're in really great hands with the LA Alliance counselors, just like Mr. P, in understanding the UC Apply and UC application system. So one of our goals today is really highlight the differences between UC Apply and the Common App. And there's also going to be a little bit of a walkthrough through different sections of the Common App and commenting on things to keep in mind as you're completing it, or as you will complete it in the near future. And then I'm also going to set aside a little bit of time towards the end to answer any questions that you may all have regarding the Common App, or even just applying to college in general. So if you have questions, please feel free to use the chat function, and we'll just get to that at the closing segment. So a little bit on my friend Andy. He, as I mentioned, he's a senior assistant director at UC Berkeley, and particularly he works very closely with transfer students, so students who are transferring from CC in their usually their third year. He is a former admissions officer at another LA university. I know that there are a lot of Bruins at LA Alliance teachers. JT Mr. Tianco is also a Bruin, so they'll all know what that other LA school is. And what's really cool is, Andy has done a lot of work in developing programming for first gen and underrepresented students, and helping make higher education more effective and also more accessible. So Andy, thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything that I missed? I know, or anything you'd like to add at this point?
Nah. No. Thanks for the hyping me up, Fayong. Really appreciate it. Yeah, my name's Andy, pronouns he and his, currently serving as the Senior Assistant Director of Admissions at UC Berkeley. And I also serve as the Transfer Admissions Manager. So I oversee transfer admissions specifically as well. And I previously, before starting in my role here at UC Berkeley, I was serving as the Senior Assistant Director of Admissions at the University of Southern California, USC, and also an alum of USC as well. And really excited to be here today and be able to provide, hopefully, some helpful information to you. And I was also a first-gen student myself, immigrant myself, and a Pell Grant recipient too. So I'm really excited to be here today.
Totally. Thank you so much again. And so to kick things off, what's helpful is what I thought would be helpful is a little bit of a refresher. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but just a high-level overview of some of the key facts and dates as it pertains to the UC application. So it opened on August 1st, so it's already open. You can go in, make a profile, and technically, put in all your information, all your essays as of now. So the app window is a little different, a slight tweak. So in previous years, it's been the application deadline is November 30th, but this year is December 2nd. So Andy, I'll toss it over to you if you want to talk a little bit about the thinking about the deadline change.
Yeah, thank you. So generally, the application deadline is November 30th. So every year, the UC application becomes available online on August 1st, as you see on the screen there. And then students will be able to submit their application, what we call the filing period, between October 1st and generally November 30th. However, with this year, November 30th, not only falling on a Saturday, but at the tail end of the Thanksgiving holiday break, we thought it'd be in the best interest of students to provide them more flexibility, more time to submit their application and not having to worry about that during the holiday break. So we moved it to December 2nd this year specifically. And I imagine that next year and cycles moving forth, it will go back to November 30th. But for this specific application cycle, it's going to be December 2nd. And that's, of course, for first year and transfers.
Yeah, for sure. And that's super helpful in the past when I've read for Berkeley. There are times where system outages forces the school to kind of, or the system to push back the deadline anyways. So it's nice that there's a little bit of like a preemptive, like, hey, let's give a little buffer time. As you all probably know, UC apply one app for all 9 campuses, choose 4 out of 8 PIQs, 350 words. I don't think I need to maybe hark on this. One of the big distinctions, no letters of rec or interviews. In most cases, I have heard of like potentially edge cases where maybe certain students are offered an interview, but at least in the years that I've been reading, I've never encountered that personally. But just something to be aware of. In most cases, there will be no interviews as part of the admissions process. As it pertains to SAT, ACT, it's a test blind policy. So, if you have taken it, there will unfortunately be no part of the application for you to enter your score. I'm sure you crushed it. So save that for the Common App. And then there's an $80 application fee per UC campus. And it's going to be the same for every school. Andy, anything you want to add?
Yeah, definitely in terms of the interviews at UC Berkeley, we don't conduct interviews for admissions purposes. With regard to the letters of rec, there may be a request for letters of rec, and students are going to get an email, so they'll be notified if we need a letter of rec. But generally, yeah, letters of rec are not required unless we request it of you. But otherwise, yeah, everything else looks good.
Cool. Yeah, I realized I got the two mixed up. That's what I meant. Letters of rec. That's what maybe a small percentage might be requested. So thanks for catching that. Right. So next, the reason why we're all here today. So here are some key facts and dates to keep in mind in terms of the Common App. So same app open date. And then in terms of when the filing day or deadline is, it really depends on the school. So a general rule of thumb, if you're planning to apply somewhere early action, early decision, all those deadlines are basically that first week of November, maybe potentially a little bit later than that, but really count on that first week of November. And then regular submission can really be anywhere between December and early January. Really depends on the school that you're looking at. In terms of essays, there's one personal statement that will go out to every school that you apply to through the Common App, 650 words. But then once you get a little bit more granular about the particular schools, there's going to be different requirements. So some schools might have supplemental essays or short answer essays that they'd like you to fill out. Some schools may require letters of rec, some may not. Some may require more letters of rec. So there's a lot to keep in mind, in addition to, you know, what we mentioned, testing and interviews that will also vary depending on the school. So there's a lot more, you know, considerations and a little bit of like moving parts when it comes to the Common App. So important to be aware of that. And then the application fee will also vary by school. It can be as little as $30, as much as $90. There's also an application fee waiver component as well. Andy, if you want to talk about that or add on anything in terms of high level Common App things to keep in mind.
Yeah, definitely. The first thing with regard to early submission, Fayong alluded to it, but there's early action, right? But there's also early decision and restrictive early action. And with early decision, that's binding, right? So that means that if you apply to you can only apply to one school, ED, right? And if you apply to that school as early decision, ED, and you're admitted, you are now contractually binded to go to that school, right? And then you will have to withdraw your application from all other schools that you apply to. Early action, however, is non-binding, right? So that means that if you apply early, you're accepted early, you are not required to go to that school, right? You're not required to go to that university. And in most instances, you can apply to multiple institutions as early action. Now, there's restrictive early action. Restrictive early action is also non-binding. However, you can only apply to one school as restrictive early action. There's a small caveat to that. There are some schools such as Stanford that will allow you to apply to multiple schools as early action, if that means that by applying to those other schools as early action, you will be considered for scholarships. So for example, at USC, if you apply to USC as early action, you're automatically considered for merit scholarships, right? So in that case, Stanford will allow you to apply to USC as early action as well, because you're being considered for scholarships. But in most other cases, restrictive early action means you can only apply to that one school as REA. And then, yeah, with regard to the application fee waiver, honestly, most institutions on the Common App will grant you an application fee waiver because it's really not a big deal. And believe me, most admissions officers do not have the time to go verify with your high school to see if you were on free reduced lunch or something like that. We just don't have the time to do that. And something, in my opinion, and I know most institutions feel this way, something as silly as an application fee waiver shouldn't serve as a barrier to access to education. So check in with the school that you're looking into to see if they'll be able to provide you an application fee waiver, and 90% of the time they will be able to.
No, that's really good to know, and something that I didn't know applying when I was applying or working at UC Berkeley. So definitely something good for students to keep in mind for sure. Now we're heading to the section where we're going to walk through a little bit of parts of the Common application, and these are the general areas that we'll be looking at, from the college search, the activities, personal statement, and essays, letters, rec, etc. And these are just some example schools. So, you know, you have a visual, you can see sort of the types of schools and get some different schools from different states. Earlier when we were chatting, Andy gave me a little bit of a hard time that USC wasn't on here. But it wasn't to throw shade. I needed some non-California schools, but also, yeah, it was a little bit to throw shade too. So looking at school requirements, what we talked about earlier, the biggest takeaway is that the schools are going to have their own deadlines. As we mentioned, you can look and see that, whoops, my bad. Sorry about that. So you can see that when looking at, for example, Cornell versus NYU, you can see that while they have the same early decision deadline, November 1st, you can see that NYU has what's called an early decision 2 deadline. So it's essentially functions similarly as an ED1, but just giving students a little bit more time and also the option to really indicate to the school that, hey, NYU is my #1 choice. I want to go here, and if you admit me, I will enroll. So what's important to remember here is that there's more moving parts. So it's really important to stay organized and get your deadlines straight. Organize your essays, make sure that you have your ducks in a row. Last thing you want is 1 week before the deadline realize, oh wow, I'm missing something, or oh shoot, NYU's deadline is a week earlier than I anticipated. So you want to be really aware of that. Andy, anything to add here?
No, I mean, you covered it really well. I think the only one small thing I'd add would be that there's really no benefit to applying before the application deadline that you see there, right? So if you can submit your application now, way before the November 1st deadline, but you're still not going to be really at an advantage or anything like that. And most instances, those schools are not going to be reviewing your application until after the deadline anyways. So my point in saying all that is definitely take your time and crafting a well-prepared application, because again, there's no benefit to submitting it today or November 1st.
Yeah, that's a really good call out. It kind of reminds me of growing up. My mom would say, like in China, like the students that got the best scores are always the ones who submitted the test last. Very rarely is it the speed runner.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Yep. Okay, cool. So adding colleges. There are so many colleges that use the Common App. You can see here more than 1,096 as of 2024. And what I really want to try to encourage you all to do, if you haven't started already, is just do your homework and research schools that you may not have ever heard of. I'm certainly guilty of this. Going through high school, I thought that, hey, the US World News top 25 schools, those are the only 25 good schools that are worth applying to, and that's really not the case. A lot of those rankings are actually based off of things that don't maybe directly benefit the student. It's more prestige, it's more selectivity. These are all things that give the perception of it being a better school without necessarily being a better school. So I really encourage you to do your homework and look beyond the top 25 rankings. If you are looking to go out of state, which I'm assuming maybe most students that are in this call, there's some level of interest there. Check out some of the neighboring schools and the location you're looking at and see what they have to offer, because every school does have interesting offerings for students. Yeah, Andy, anything you want to add?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, if you're not familiar with the Common App, to reiterate what Fei-Yong said, it's a centralized application processing service that over 1,000 universities and colleges in America utilize. You create one Common App and you're applying to all these different schools. I will say though, to talk about the top 25, you can't even apply to all top 25 schools because the Common App limits you to only applying to 20 schools max. And if you apply to 21, 22, those 21, that 21st and 22nd school is not going to get your application. And furthermore, to talk about, rankings, those are just numbers and it's perceived prestige. But what's most important is that knowing any college in the world would be lucky to have you choose them and commit to their college. And I think, honestly, what the most important thing is truly being able to envision yourself excelling at the colleges that's on your radar. And fit, again, is more than just ranking. It's more than that prestige. And it's about determining if a college's values and visions is going to align with yours. So definitely do the research and also look at the graduate outcomes of the schools that you're looking into as well, because that plays a huge role.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to touch on just one quick comment before we move on. So Andy and I, we actually didn't mention this, but we were grad school classmates, and we did our master's program together. And I'm sure maybe Andy, you did this to an extent. Like before we enrolled in the program, we talked to some alumni, we talked to maybe some instructors in the program to learn about, hey, what are the curriculum, the graduation outcomes, the employment outcomes kind of coming on the other side. So highly recommend, as you're looking at these schools, try your best to have those same types of conversations. You know, like, yes, admissions officers like Andy have a lot of great info to give. Yes, current students have a lot of great info to give. But what's kind of slept on are alumni who have kind of gone through the experience or started working, you know, and have the hindsight and perspective of how did their college experience, you know, help them become or maybe distract from who they are today. And that's all important information to know. Sweet. Next is looking at the activities. And this is actually, there isn't, there are some distinctions between the Common App activities and the UC Apply, can't recall if it's called, I think it's still called activities list. So what's important to note here is mostly the length. As you can see here, the Common App activities is actually going to give you less space to talk about your activities on average. You're, for example, for the description, you're going to get 150 characters versus UC where you get 350. So what does that mean? You're going to have to be more concise. You're going to have to really focus on the measurable impacts and key highlights. So as you can see here in this like example that I generated, you know, the student could have easily said just recruited members, right? But the fact that they said recruited 30 plus members, like that, to me, you know, as a coach or as an admissions officer reading the description, that is more compelling. That is more impactful. You can actually see the tangible result of what they did. Same with raising $2,500 as well. So with UC Apply, you're going to get a little bit more space. Not to say in the UC app, you're not talking about impact, you're not talking about highlights, but you have a little bit more wiggle room to play with. You may be talking about relevant details, maybe adding in like certain highlights or anecdotes that you really want to share. You don't get as much of that wiggle room with Common App. So, Andy, anything you want to chime in with?
Yeah, definitely. First thing that I really want to say is that the activity summary or activities list is essentially your resume, right? We're curious about what you're doing outside of the classroom. And I have a quick story to share, but I mentioned I was a first gen college student, when there were sessions like this and admissions officers visiting my high school. I remember the admissions rep was talking about this resume, and I had no idea what he was talking about. I thought he was being bougie, being fancy, pronouncing it resume, and I was like, bro, that's resume. And that's just, my point of sharing that story is that you don't need to have a polished resume or anything like that, right? We're honestly just curious about what you're doing outside of the classroom. And to add to that as well, it doesn't need to be always school-sponsored organizations nor clubs. It can be familial responsibilities as well, right? It can be that, hey, you're supporting your parents at their business, you're helping your siblings with their homework, you're helping to take care of your grandparents, right? You do your own laundry, for God's sake. Like, you should put that down as an activity because in my opinion, it epitomizes your ability to take initiative and also your ability to balance responsibilities. And as you can imagine, that's important to demonstrate to colleges, right? They want to be able to see that you're doing a variety of things that's outside the classroom, right? Being able to balance responsibilities, as I mentioned. And then also, I do want to say that leadership, I know in what you can see here on the screen, it says positions/leadership, right? Leadership is found in more ways than just being president of an organization or a captain of a club, right? Leadership is found just by simply perhaps being part of the founder of the club, right? By participating in the club even. You don't need to have some formal leadership title to demonstrate leadership. And the last thing, sorry, I'm being long-winded, but I'm an admissions officer, so I'm inherently long-winded. The last thing also is that it's not a competition to see who has the longest list of extracurricular activities. Not a competition about that at all, right? I think what's awesome and what colleges like to see, and I know myself, what I like to see is consistency, right? If you've been involved in one club, one organization, that's totally fine. That's perfect. Truly, it's not a competition. I know many colleges, and USC was one of them, and UC Berkeley is another one. We're not looking for quote unquote the well-rounded student, right? Because many times if you're joining a bunch of clubs, they may be clubs that you're not interested in, right? And you're taking a time away from other clubs you're interested in or from your schoolwork. So totally fine if there's just one organization you're passionate about or one even hobby that you're immensely interested in. So again, not a competition about who has the longest list of extracurricular activities.
Yeah, there definitely were a lot of webinars where I wish you were there to say that louder for the parents in the back. But no, totally echo everything that that Andy just touched on. So next, test scores. Andy, for this one, I'd love to pass it over to you to chime in on test scores.
Yeah, definitely. So as you see there on the screen, right, some schools are going to be either test free, test optional, or they're going to require the test, right? So definitely do your research on knowing which schools are test optional, test free, or requiring the test. And sorry, I should say when we're talking about tests right now, we're talking about the ACT and the SAT specifically. There are also schools that will accept a super score, and the super score is primarily going to be accepted for the SAT. And if you're not familiar with a super score, what that means is that there are two parts of the SAT, right? There's the math part and basically the writing part. Now, the SAT is out of 1,600 currently. So you can do the best you can do on any part is 800, right? 800 times 2, 1,600. However, you can take the SAT multiple times, right? And if you got a 740 on your math part on the first attempt, but the second attempt you got a 780 on it, what the super score means is that we're going to take the 780, right? So we'll take the best score from any attempt that you took on the SAT and then combine those two and come up with a super score. Okay, so and really, if a school is test optional, I would dig deeper into doing the research and knowing if that school is actually test optional or if they kind of lean towards requiring a test. And in many cases, what you can do is you can look up the student first year admissions profile for any college, right? And they should, and maybe it's not always the case, but they should talk about how many students applied test optional, and then how many students they admitted as test free or test optional as well, right? And then you can really see if a school is test optional or not. For example, at USC, we were really test optional. 50% of the class, 50% of the applicant pool applied as test optional, and 50% of the students admitted were test optional. There are other schools, such as Georgetown, for example, in DC, where they're test optional, but 80% of the students they admit submitted a test score, submitted an SAT or an ACT score, right? So do the research there. And if you're applying test option at one school, that doesn't mean that you have to apply test optional to all other schools as well. And the last thing I just really want to mention about the SAT is that it's really just a test that's not testing you on how smart you are, how brilliant you are, your IQ, nothing like that. It's not testing you on any of that. The SAT and the ACT, they're really just stamina exams, right? And what I mean by that is that the exam is like 4 hours long. You get like 2 10-minute breaks. You're not able to walk around, and obviously you're not able to talk to anybody, right? So it's really testing your stamina. So the more you can take practice exams now and get your mindset and your mentality trained to take an exam that long, to be focused that long, I guarantee you the better you will do on the SAT and the ACT than if you didn't do any practice exams. And lastly, if you didn't know, the SAT and the ACT, what they really do is they serve to help colleges predict your first year GPA, right? So in conjunction with the SAT or the ACT and your high school GPA, right? we can come up with a formula to see how well you're going to do in your first year at a college. So it doesn't tell a college anything about your second year, your third year, nor your fourth year. And it doesn't tell you how smart you are, how brilliant you are, anything like that, right? So all in all, do the research, see if a school is really test optional or if they do require the test. And then from there, if you are going to take the test, take as many practice exams as possible. And I guarantee you will do better than if you didn't take any practice exams.
Yeah. No, love that, Andy. And I just added something in the chat. It's the UCLA Common Data Set. So that's actually a good place to start. Kind of doing some of the research and digging that Andy was referring to. Every school is legally required to publish that every year and update it every year. But you'll notice if you dig into it, as I have and Andy probably has, the information is going to differ. Some parts of the spreadsheet may be more or less filled, and beyond standardized testing, there's also applicants broken down by demographics as well. So it's interesting and highly recommend checking it out if you're interested. Cool. So next, obviously, the personal statement is a big part of the common application. And as we mentioned earlier, in this webinar, you choose one out of 7 different prompts, and you have up to 650 words to respond, which is more than what you get for the UC PIQs, each one being 350 words. So what does this mean? What is the kind of the takeaway? You get a chance to share a longer narrative-driven essay. So you kind of get to share more of a story. And you think about stories, you think about like, for example, like Star Wars, the hero's journey, right? They don't just say like, oh, there's a Death Star, and then Luke takes it on and just defeats it right away. No, there's kind of the Tatooine arc, right? And then there's he meets the mentor, Obi-Wan, who takes them on this journey, and he discovers Force, which I learned recently is kind of a metaphor for religion. And there's all this like the ebb and flow of the journey, which is with the larger word count, the Common App and the personal statement really allows you to dig into a little bit more. Whereas the UCPIQ, it's a little bit more, they're concisely looking to have you address the certain area they're asking about. There's a leadership essay, there's a creativity essay. Okay, you have 350 words. Tell us, what does leadership mean to you? How do you demonstrate it? What does creativity mean to you? How do you demonstrate it? So it was a little less leeway from that perspective. So yeah, while I scroll down, just show kind of an example intro for what a beginning personal statement could look like. Andy, anything you want to add in terms of personal statement?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, with the UC PIQs, the personal insight question, it's pretty straightforward. Just answer the prompt, right? What I would recommend though is right now you can start looking at already what the PIQs are, right? And choose 4 out of the 8 and start brainstorming, right? Start thinking about experiences, situations, circumstances, scenarios that relate to that. And the big thing is always just being able to tie that back into how that experience, whatever lesson you learned, is going to help you in college, right? That's really important. And similarly with the Common App, I shared this one example essay because after all these years, it's really stuck out to me. But the student, they were talking about how they were on a plane, and I surmised it was their first time ever on a plane. And they were talking about how they were flying to India for the first time to visit their family, whatever the case may be. And as the plane was taking off, the student blacked out. They passed out. And they talked about how they had this crippling fear of flying. And they recognized this fear. So the first thing they did when they came back to the States was they took flying lessons. And they talked about, again, how they recognized this as a fear, but they wanted to confront it. They wanted to take it head on. They wanted to really overcome that challenge. And the last thing they talked about, which is probably the most important thing they talked about was how now they had something in their back pocket they can turn to as evidence and as confidence to say, look, I overcame this potentially most traumatic experience of my life. So this organic chemistry exam at UC Berkeley, easy money. This calculus final at NYU, easy money. Now, I don't share that story with you to say that you need to have some traumatic experience or some really, I don't know, like crippling fear experience or anything like that. But you see how this one story tells us a lot more about a student than simply them providing us with their life story, right? And what I mean by life stories, I have read so many essays where the student is like, hey, I was born in LA and then I went to elementary school here and then I moved to Seattle because my dad got a job at Boeing. So we were there throughout middle school, and then my mom got a job at UT Austin. So we moved to Austin. I don't really like it here in Austin. It's really humid. I didn't like it in Seattle. It rained a lot. So that's why I'm applying to schools now in California because I like the moderate weather. And you'd be surprised how many students have some sort of similar essay to that. And if you heard that, you don't learn much about the student at all, right? So my advice is not to give us your life story, but rather the story of your life. And again, there's a key distinctive difference there. So all in all, really got to think about moments, start brainstorming situations, scenarios, circumstances that have some kind of key takeaway, some kind of life lesson that is applicable and directly transferable to college, right? Because then a college is going to be able to see like, oh, okay, this is a student that overcame something. This is a student that is prepped for the rigors of college, for the ups and downs of college. And if you're able to do that and you're able to make it an engaging story, believe me, admissions officers are reading thousands of applications, and you want to be as engaging as possible. And truthfully, sorry, Faye, I know I'm being long-winded. But truthfully, the qualitative components, it's the only section of the Common App and the UC PIQs that you have complete control over, right? You can't go back and change your grades from 9th, 10th, or 11th grade, right? You can't change them. They're static. So really, if you start now, start thinking about the PIQ, start thinking about the Common App essay, start brainstorming, you're going to be able to craft a well-prepared, engaging narrative essay for the admissions officers to read. And just inherently by doing that, you're going to stand out.
Yeah, no worries at all, man. That's why I love having you on. You give so much amazing context and insights. And the only thing I will quickly touch on is that I was listening to a podcast yesterday from the knowledge called the Knowledge Project, and they're talking about storytelling. And one thing they said really resonated with me. They said that the thing about stories is the most compelling ones, there's a very distinct change in the main character or the person telling the story. If there's no change, then it just becomes an anecdote. It's just something that maybe you mentioned to your like partner, over dinner. You mentioned to a friend. You're like, oh wow, this interesting thing happened. Isn't that funny, or isn't that cool? And it you don't want that to be the reaction from your admissions officer, right? Be like, oh, that's cool. Well, okay, you moved to Seattle. All right, cool. Well, I hope make it to California in better weather. You want there to be a very distinct and compelling change, and it doesn't have, everyone's change is different. It's really that work of introspecting and thinking, hey, how did this change me, right? Like even if the event itself, maybe the result didn't change that much, but I changed a ton. Now, how do I bring that out? How do I highlight that? So just something that felt, go ahead.
Sorry, Faye, if I can add one more thing as well, I think that is more pertinent in the past few years than ever has been,
Yep.
is that we know when you're utilizing AI, artificial intelligence, to help you write an essay. With regards to the UC specifically, there is a software that's able to detect plagiarism, right? And if you're utilizing AI, it likely will be able to detect that. The Common App, I don't think there's a software for that just yet, given there's 1,100 schools. However, I am fairly good, and I know my colleagues at across the colleges that utilize Common App, we know when something was ChatGPT generated or not, because it's too formal. right? It's utilizing language and verbiage that perhaps is not something a 17, 18-year-old would utilize. So my point in saying that is that we want it to sound like a 17 or 18-year-old wrote this, and that's okay. It doesn't need to sound completely polished. However, I would avoid using emojis and using LOL or haha or something like that in the essay itself. But yeah, I would have ChatGPT or AI, whatever, be a foundation and kind of a guiding star, but not having it write the essay for you.
No, great call out. Very relevant for the times we live in, for sure.
Sure, I wish we had that when we were applying, right, Fayon?
We might have. Maybe some students had a secret access. I definitely read some essays that seemed like they were ChatGPT generated.
I think I went to college with paper applications, so that might be, yeah.
Oh man. So next, supplemental materials. So materials is kind of broad. It can be the supplemental essays. I think that's what generally students think of first, but can also be additional information, which I think Andy's gonna maybe touch on in just a second. But what supplemental essays or material more broadly is, it's meant to personalize your application for the specific school. So all the schools you apply through the Common App, they're going to get your personal statement, they're going to get your activities, descriptions, and leadership positions. But then for a school, say like NYU, they're going to include this essay and wonder, why do you want to come to NYU specifically? And this example here is Cornell. So Cornell is wondering, hey, like why would you want to come to Cornell specifically? And they're looking for kind of evidence of some alignment in terms of maybe your personal goals, what you're trying to get out of college, how you're looking to grow, and how that aligns with what Cornell offers. Andy mentioned before, important to do your research. It's especially important to do your research for your supplemental essays. And in particular, not just looking at some brochures, looking at the website and say, oh, I've done my research. Oh, look, Cornell is their mascot is the big red bear. They have this slope day, which is awesome. So I'm going to mention that, show that, hey, I looked at their website. No, you really got to go beneath the surface and really figure out, hey, like, what about Cornell's offerings? Is it a specific professor or like a project they're working on? And I find that super interesting and I want to get involved in some way. And, even though this answer might change, this is how I can see myself getting involved. Like, that's kind of the level of like nuance and specificity that really to a coach or to an admissions officer shows, wow, like this student, like I can see them participating in this community in this way. So anything you want to add?
Yeah. Doing your research is certainly important, and with the question that we see here on the screen, it's asking why, basically getting at why Cornell and a lot of schools that utilize the Common App that have a short answer essay like this, it's basically getting at why us, right? And what I mean by doing the research is that there are some schools that will value and do track demonstrated interest. So I would highly recommend that if you are looking into a school, to reach out to the admissions officer for your current high school now and just straight up ask them, like, do you guys track demonstrated interest? But I can tell you that many schools that don't track demonstrated interest, what they are more concerned with rather is demonstrated understanding, right? And what demonstrated understanding really is that if you want to go to Cornell for A, B, and C, you got to be able to explain coherently and cohesively how that is going to help you accomplish your goals of X, Y, and Z. And when you can do that well, and you can tie those two things together well and marry those two things together well, what you're demonstrating to the college is, hey, I've done the research into this program. I have a genuine interest, perhaps even a passion for this program. And the most important thing you're going to demonstrate is that you have goals beyond your 4 years at that particular college or something like that, right? So it's important to not only know if a school tracks demonstrate interest or not, but if they don't, then you got to do the research into and demonstrate understanding. And then the one thing I want to talk about as well is what's called additional information. the UC application in the Common App, it's going to have this portion, right, that's called additional information. So you're basically providing the colleges with contextual information, right? Additional extenuating circumstances. And for example, if I'm looking at your transcript, right, and I see that she didn't do well in a particular semester, just by looking at your transcript, I'm going to have no idea what happened. I'm just going to think, oh, maybe they were slacking off that spring semester in 10th grade or whatever the case may be, right? So it's important to know that, hey, I don't know this, so complete the additional information because, hey, maybe you were impacted by COVID, maybe you were impacted by a natural disaster, right? Maybe you had some personal, familial, medical circumstance, right? And it's important that you provide to the level that you're comfortable with as much contextual information as possible because colleges are not going to fill in that gap for you, right? You got to provide us with that context. That's really important. And also with regard to short answers like this Cornell University question, you got to be specific, right? Don't come up with a very vast general fill in the blank response that you can do for 20 schools, right? For example, I've read so many short answers that were like, yeah, I want to go to USC because it's a top ranked school. It's located in LA. It's consistently moderate weather, right? But if I took out USC and I put in UCLA, that response would still make sense, right? If I took out USC and I put in NYU, right? Located in a big city, right? A lot of opportunities, top ranked school, that response would still make sense. So it's important that you get really specific and demonstrate your understanding as to why you want to attend that school.
Yeah, no, wonderfully said, Andy. And then for this next one on financial aid, want to talk about that briefly?
Yeah, definitely. So financial aid, there's federal funding, right? And if you want to get federal funding, what you need to do is to submit the FAFSA, and the FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, right? So that's how you get money from the US government. The deadline has changed. So generally it used to be available, sorry, not deadline. It used to be available October 1st, but with this FAFSA Simplification Act that Congress dropped the ball on, it has moved to December 1st, right? So December 1st, I believe the FAFSA application, if you want federal funding from the government, will become available then. There's also the Cal Grant, right? So Cal Grant is for students, California residents, right? That you can utilize funding from the state of California to help you pay for the cost of attendance at a California public or private institution such as UCLA, Stanford, Berkeley, USC, right? So it's important that you definitely apply for money. And you see there, grants and scholarships, that's free money, right? We love free money. That's money that doesn't need to be repaid. So Cal Grant would fall within that. There's also loans, borrow money that must be repaid with interest. Now, I know there's some hesitancy when it comes to taking out loans, and I completely get that. I will say, though, that loans really, like the best investment you can make is in yourself, right? And loans, there are some schools that will provide you with loans in terms of their financial aid package, and you got to first see if it makes sense for you. But I will say that loans, like the best investment you can make is in yourself, and loans shouldn't be viewed with a negative connotation. There's also work study, right? And you see there's part-time jobs for students to earn while studying. Now you have to qualify for work study, and when you submit your FAFSA, you're going to learn if you're qualified for work study money or not. And that's basically a great thing if you are qualified for work study, because colleges, we love students that have work study, because a lot of that funding, a lot of the money that they're paid is subsidized, which means that the US government gives UC Berkeley money to help pay for these work studies so that there's no money coming out from UC Berkeley's budget, right? In many cases, it'll be subsidized. In other cases, the US government is paying 100% for it. So if you are offered work study, take advantage of that, and you're probably going to get a job on campus as well. And the CSS profile there. CSS stands for the College Scholarship Service Profile. A lot of private colleges will utilize the CSS profile. Now, the CSS profile is how you apply for institutional aid, right? That's how you applied for aid from an NYU. That's how you applied for aid from USC, right? And it's important that you submit the CSS profile so that in conjunction with federal funding, you're getting as much money as possible from the government as well as from the institution to help you cover the cost of attendance. And then you see the CSS profile there is available October 1st. Now, I will say that there are separate financial aid deadlines, financial aid application deadlines. If you're applying as early action, early decision, or regular decision, they're going to have different application deadlines for that as well. All of that information is going to be posted on that respective college's website, so you'll know the deadlines for financial aid. But all in all, it's important to know that number one, apply for any scholarships, right? And Fayon, can I share this quick story actually?
Sure.
Several years ago, I remember the student, when I was living in Texas, the student was walking into a Walmart, and at the entrance of the Walmart, there was an advertisement or publication, or whatever, for scholarships for college, right? It was like 5 scholarships. So the student just went home and applied, right? You know what? They ended up getting all 5 scholarships. And the reason they got all 5 scholarships was that no one else applied. And so my point in sharing that story is to say that apply for all the scholarships that you're qualified and eligible for, because you never know, right? And I'll tell you this, if you don't apply for the scholarship, you're not going to get it for sure, you know? So apply for all the external third-party scholarships as possible. Apply for federal funding, FAFSA, CSS profile, institutional financial aid, right? And then that's going to help you come up with really a plan. And the last thing, it's not here, it's a bullet point, but every school that accepts federal funding is required by law to have what's called a net price calculator. And net price calculator is pretty accurate, but it takes the cost of attendance of that institution. It takes into account the personal information that you input, and it pumps out a net price calculator for you so you can see how much attending that school may cost for you. And it's pretty accurate. It's like 80% accurate. And thanks, Vayan, for pulling that up. It's pretty accurate. It's like 80% accurate across institutions. So really do that.
Yeah, love that. Great information. And love what you said about the apply for every scholarship you're eligible for. That might be relevant later in this presentation.
Great segue.
Yeah, I know, right? So for the sake of time, I'll do the slide on my own, and so we can try to carve out as much time as we can for Q&A at the end. But letters of rec, the last point we'll kind of touch on is that schools are gonna, depending on their requirements, they're gonna have, on average, most schools will ask for 2 teacher recs and then maybe 1 counselor rec. There might be more or less depending on the specific school, but general word of advice is really choose recommenders that it's not the title, it's not the subject they teach, it's really recommenders who know you well, can speak to specific examples of, say, your strengths or your curiosity and maybe even your personality, right? We're not, admissions officers aren't as interested in recommenders who reiterate what's already said in your essay, right? Or what's already said in your activities list. They know what you did. You know, they don't need your teacher to confirm that, yes, you in fact did that activity. They would rather get more context and more clarity of the picture of how did you show up in this classroom, right? Like if you're president of this club, what did that look like? What did they see from their perspective? And a lot of times, especially for students kind of coming from public schools, these teachers are writing a lot of recs every year. I think I've heard anywhere from 15 to 20 recs, or 15 to 20 students. Maybe that's even on the lower side. So really recommend helping the teacher out as much as possible. I know some teachers have a form that they'll have you preemptively fill out, but even if there isn't, it can be helpful just to think through those examples on your own and think through, what would I want this teacher to highlight? What specific moments did I feel like, hey, I was demonstrating a strength? I feel like I was being myself and I feel like I was contributing something to the classroom, and I want this teacher to highlight that. So every teacher is going to welcome the help and welcome the additional context. So yeah, actually, I take it back, Andy. Anything you want to add here? I feel like letters of rec is an important part, so I'd love to if there's something you want to chime in with, would love to hear it.
Yeah, definitely. I'll try to be brief. Number one, if you're the person you're getting the letter recommendation from, right? They don't need to be teaching the course that you're applying to, right? So for example, if you're applying to physics, you don't have to get a letter recommendation from your physics teacher. Secondarily, if I can leverage off what Fei Yang shared, yeah, get it from an academic resource, right? Counselor, teacher that knows you well, that knows you more than just a great student, right? A lot of times I read so many letters of rec where the teacher is like, yeah, student got an A in my class, showed up to class on time, did well on the homework, did well on all the exams. Look, we can pull up your transcript, see that you got an A, and probably be able to surmise that you show up to class and did well on the exams and homework. But what's so not easily discernible by looking at a percentage, by looking at a simple letter grade, is perhaps you always sat in front of the class. Perhaps other students came to you when they needed additional assistance or support, or you always ask great questions, whatever the case may be, right? Those are things that admissions officers don't know by just looking at a simple grade. So my point is, get it from a teacher that knows you really well, and they don't need to be teaching the subject that you're applying to at the college.
Yeah, absolutely. So